Um. Thank you all for being here on such a lovely day. We'll start out with a land acknowledgement and then a short comment on public comments for tonight. And then we'll move into a training topic and 4 service level complaints for today. Since time immemorial, the Kalapuya people have been the indigenous stewards to our region, building dynamic communities, maintaining balance with wildlife, and enacting sustainable land practices. This land acknowledgement is a way of resisting the erasure of indigenous histories and to honor Native communities by inviting truth and reconciliation. Following treaties between 1851 and 1855, Kalapuya people were dispossessed of their indigenous homeland by the United States government and forcibly removed to the Coast Reservation in Western Oregon. As we consider the impacts of colonization, we also acknowledge the strength and resiliency of displaced indigenous people. City of Eugene is built within the traditional homelands known as Kalapuya Ilihi. Kalapuya descendants are citizens of the Confederated Tribes of Grand Ronde Community of Oregon and the Confederated Tribes of the Siletz Indians of Oregon. They continue to make contributions in our communities here and across the lands. We express our respect for the inherent political sovereignty of all federally recognized tribal nations and indigenous people who live in the state of Oregon and across the nation. We will take public comments after our review of service complaints and the auditor's report, but I want to just make a note for anybody who is considering or would like to make public comment tonight. Civilian Review Board accepts public comment at each public meeting. People wishing to speak in person must sign up to do so using the request to speak form within the first 15 minutes. And so those who are participating online may use the request to speak form that can be found at eugene-or.gov/CRB to indicate their desire to speak. So please fill this out. If you would like to speak, we will not take comments if you have not filled out this form. Thank you. All right. We're going to move on to minutes approval from our February meeting. We had a chance to review those. Are there any amendments that you all would like to make to those minutes? All right.
I move to approve February's minutes.
Second.
All right. All in favor? All right. February minutes are approved. Do we have any comments from commission liaisons tonight?
Liz here.
Yeah.
Liz not here, so.
All right. So our training topic is the police auditor's annual report.
Do any of you want to make any opening comments before we get to the end of the report? Sometimes you all do that.
Yes. Would you like to start us out, Monique?
Yes.
Thank you,
think-
Lindsay.
It's been a little less than a month now, but in June, I attended a ride-along, or I went on a ride-along with Officer Collier, and that was really fun. I said in the email that I couldn't have been paired with a better officer. I think she demonstrated a lot of patience, but also firmness and technical skill. And I later found out that she's only been on the force for 2 years, but I was very impressed and grateful to have gone on that ride-along with her. I also, I believe this was in June, watched Lindsay's presentation to the city council. I thought it was a really well delivered speech, and I think some of the council members had mentioned that as well. So I just want to express gratitude for you and how lucky we are to have you and how lucky we have been that you've been the interim auditor. And that is all.
I'll just say, glad to be here, glad to be on the board and excited to work with you all.
Thank you.
Just say welcome, Elise. This is me meeting you. Yeah, good to have you.
Yeah, I also would like to echo what Monique said, that city councilors noted that it was one saying the best CRB presentation that they had seen, so. Also want to express gratitude for your service to our community in the role as interim auditor. And thank you. Thank you, Rob.
She's doing all the hard work.
Can I offer you the floor to? All right, thank you.
I'm going to share my screen. Give me 1 second.
So for those of you who already watched the city council presentation, you will notice this is largely the same. I've truncated it in certain ways, but I figured while some of this initial information will be more or less things that you know, because I figure every time we talk about the annual report, it's an opportunity to help educate community on what it is that we do and how we do it. So as some of it will be well known to you all, but I feel like it's worth. So
Is it possible to just click that?
oh. Yeah, and then I'll hit enter. And now wait for a second. There you go. Okay, so the 2024 annual report. So what we typically do, we kind of close out at the end of the first quarter of the following year to look back. Usually this gives us enough time to look through kind of what happened. There will occasionally be like lingering cases that are open over that period of time. We've had fewer than this year than the previous years, which I think is really good sign. But that's why it takes us so long to get these to you. So we close it out, look at things at the end of the first quarter, and then we wait for city council's schedule to get time to make our report to them. So you can go ahead and just click forward. So basically, we'll do a very quick history of civilian oversight in Eugene, talk about the mission, staff, and purview of our office, talk about the 2024 results, and then talk about ongoing and emerging work. One more. So essentially, we're rounding the corner on 20 years of the successful charter amendment, which is what put this office, the possibility of this office into place. And then this is sort of like the first phase of establishing the independent auditor's office happened over this 2-year period of time. So voters said, we're going to amend the charter to put the office in place. Council establishes the police auditor's office. They agree to protocols and establishes civilian review board. So that's kind of the front end work that happens. And then you can go to the next slide is sort of refining the work of the auditor's office. So you learn some things as you're standing up new things and you refine it as you go. So the charter was amended from authorized to shall. This is an important detail because it's not that city council is allowed to appoint a police auditor. It's that they must have a police auditor. And that was an important strengthening of the charter. They did a ordinance review to harmonize the ordinance with things that they wanted the auditor's office to do. And the ordinances were revised. So we are largely living within the system that was established, sort of put into place and kind of cemented in 2009. While it was set up sort of in the aftermath of a very particular kind of police misconduct, predatory officers who were preying on women, and that misconduct going on a very long time and not being able to be noticed. Our system comes out of that sort of heritage. It has been a very resilient system to meet a lot of different kinds of needs. And so the thoughtful way that the system was set up, I think, has really laid a really important foundation for the work that we can continue to do now, even though different concerns have emerged over time. Keep going forward. So we used to talk about this, and I will too, some of the critical structural elements are that we're independent. We don't sit within the chain of command of BPD. We don't sit in the chain of command, actually, even of the city manager. The auditor reports directly to city council, which gives some independence. That is really important. We have unfettered access to information and records. And not only is this sort of theoretically true, but in actuality, EPD is very diligent about fulfilling requests in a timely fashion in an organized way. We have really a very highly functioning relationship that is not something that exists in all jurisdictions, and it's something that makes our work a lot better and more possible, more timely, more efficient, and then better service to community. So access to information and transparency is really important. And then we have funding. So these are the things that sort of make the work of this office stable and possible over time. Keep going. So you can click forward to the next slide. So while it took the work of literally tens of thousands of people, like between voters and community members who were on police commission, who made recommendations for how the auditor's office should be set up in different community panels, a lot of people over time working to stand the structure up. Staff are the ones who sort of do the day police oversight stuff. So at the moment, I'm the interim auditor. Craig Bernetsky will be joining us August 20th. So this will be my last meeting with you all here as interim auditor. Hooray. Craig will be coming in August 20th. Rob is the associate police auditor. I will soon then join him again as another associate police auditor. We have Amanda Cordova, the senior program coordinator, who does the lion's share of our intakes. And it is sort of the first point of contact for most community members. And then we have our amazing Beatrice Otero Hernandez, who is our community engagement coordinator and translation specialist. So we do complaint intakes and classifications. We monitor investigations and we recommend adjudications. This is sort of our central functions. We also review uses of force. So in the database that we share with EPD, all uses of force and shows of force are tracked and they go into a system that we have visibility into, that we can look at and request additional records for: body worn camera, police reports, 911 calls, whatever it is that we feel like we would like to look at. We also review vehicle pursuits. We are allowed to recommend changes to policy and training according to the ordinance. We can report on trends. We do community outreach and we support the Civilian Review Board. So this is sort of general stuff that we do. So when it comes to the complaint process, it kind of goes through this. Today, you're going to be looking at a lot of complaints that don't go all the way through this because they didn't end up being allegations of misconduct. So there are multiple pipelines. We'll talk about classifications in a minute, but if it were to be an allegation of misconduct, it would go kind of all the way through this process. So we are the singular intake point. So regardless of where a complaint sort of is generated, it should come to us, right? So whether that's an internal complaint that's generated from EPD that then is forwarded to us, whether that's community members contacting us directly, whether that's the auditor seeing something and becoming aware of something and opening up a complaint, or a third party reaching out, we are supposed to be the consolidated intake point. This was meant to be protective against the kinds of problems that they had when the office was initially created, which was lots of people complaining, but to different people throughout the organization, and maybe made it slightly difficult to notice trend, or that there was repetition in the types of complaints or the type of victims that were making complaints. So that's why we are supposed to be this singular intake point. When we do an intake and then we conduct a preliminary investigation, this is something that Auditor Pitcher kind of significantly changed when she became auditor, was making that preliminary investigation phase more robust. So Rob and I, as associate auditors, look at all the intakes and then request whatever materials we feel like we need to make a good classification. Usually this involves reports, recordings, whether they're body worn, in-car videos, 911 dispatch recordings, radio traffic, whatever we feel like we need to make a good classification. And then one of the powers that the auditor office has that's unique is that we have the ability, the sole authority to classify. Classification is important because it determines what pipeline it goes into and the eventual outcomes that are allowable. After it's classified, then it's routed, it's investigated, and then it's adjudicated. So in terms of intakes, last year we had 320 complaints that came in. It's lower than the year before, but like more consistent with 21 and 22. If you look back even farther, there's kind of like a very gradual, slightly upward trend over time. So it's never been significantly higher than this last 5 years. It's always been a little bit lower and kind of going in that direction. But a really important point that Councillor Keating brought up at the city council meeting, and a question that I was glad to have the chance to clarify, and I clarified in the newsletter this month, is that intake doesn't equal a call, right? So our office receives many, many more hundreds of calls or pieces of communication, whether it's emails or letters or various things that aren't necessarily totally represented by the intake number. It's one of the reasons why when we look at intake volume versus classification volume, you'll see some discrepancies. So there's a number of reasons for this. One example would be if you have a large, like say, protest event and you have multiple people all complaining, same substantive complaint, same event, we will lump those together into one. Each person will still receive communication if they request it. However, it will show up as one, even if it's 50. Another reason is we are a public facing body that says we take complaints. So we receive a lot of complaints that are really far outside of our jurisdiction. If we receive complaints that are like complaints that people would reasonably think were our purview. So for example, they had a concern about something that happened at the jail. The jail is Lane County Sheriff. People don't necessarily know that. People don't necessarily, they get taken there by EPD. They don't necessarily know the jurisdictional boundary. We tend to enter those things in and then also communicate back out with references about what that is. But if someone is calling complaining about an incident that occurred in Pennsylvania or in Oklahoma or jail in California, we don't tend to put those in the intake. We do try to give people referrals. So we spend a lot of time looking up different systems, different things. If someone, I mean, we'll get calls where someone's concerned about, you know, like elder abuse or different things. And so we try to give information to help people get into the right pipelines, but those aren't always in our intake numbers. So I did like a real quick scan just from January until now, and it more than doubles, it almost triples the number of, like, if you were to look at call volume is like about triple what intake volume was. And that's just between January and this point in the year. So just in terms of work, it's sort of invisible work, but it's really important work. And it's one of the ways that we can be of service to community is trying to help people get to the right place. And it's really important to kind of give a shout out to Amanda, who does a lot of work listening, helping people who are in distress, helping people find the right place to go if they're not in the right place. So invisible, but really important work. Go forward. So I talked about this a little bit. You all know, we do these preliminary reviews. These are the things that we look at before we make our classification. You can just get on forward. So when we make our classification, these are sort of our choices. These are the different things that we can do. So policy complaint is like, no misconduct has been alleged. There's a police policy that someone doesn't like, and they would like to complain about the policy. An example would be someone who called and complained because they didn't like that police cars could drive on the bike path. And so that would be a policy complaint. They're not saying the officer did anything wrong or violated policy or was being unsafe in any way. They just didn't like that they could drive on the bike path. So those tend to go in as policy complaints. We don't get a lot of those a year. Right around a dozen is a pretty typical year for policy type complaints. Those get routed to the policy sergeant, who calls people back and makes an effort to sort of do community education, explain the policy, also listen for opportunities to improve the policy. And sometimes they do identify things that can be improved and then forward them through that. So it's the perfect person to be making that contact, both in terms of knowledge for education, but also the right person in the pipeline if there's some things that might be beneficial to change. So that one wouldn't be like tagged to any particular officer, right? It's just a policy complaint. There's inquiry. So that's when it's not serious misconduct that's been alleged. It's like supervisor level type things that a supervisor might handle. We don't have enough information to make a more accurate classification, but we do think more information should be gathered and that then the community member should be contacted. Those are routed to a supervisor, the supervisor of whatever officers were involved in the incident. They do the investigation, they contact back the reporting party to explain the findings that they have, they communicate with us. And then if we're satisfied that it was sufficient, then it gets closed and we move on. If there's an additional step that we'd like to take, or we'd like them to supplement or enhance their communication back to community members, we can request that before closing. So that's an option too. Very similar with service complaints. This could be we receive a lot of things like that would be maybe like courtesy or concerns about manner of driving, or these kinds of things that you would typically think of that a supervisor might handle in an ordinary workplace, that it's appropriate that the supervisor be the person who looks at it, determines if there's any room for improvement, talks to the employee if there is room for improvement, and then moves on. It's the things that come out of inquiries and service complaints in terms of, even though we don't deal with discipline, isn't considered discipline. It would just be considered like a non-disciplinary discussion, but sometimes that is the sort of appropriate path for a complaint. Then there's incident review. So incident review is that serious misconduct has been alleged. And we would like internal affairs to do the investigation rather than the supervisor and the chain of command of the officers. So it also means that we don't have enough information at that moment to make it an allegation of misconduct, or we would like them to do a more thorough investigation, the IA to do a more thorough investigation before we consider if it's appropriate to reclassify. Sometimes we might classify down, sometimes we might classify up to allegations of conduct. Occasionally, we will also close things out as incident reviews because maybe we can determine like something didn't happen, or it was a counterfactual claim, or there are no further steps that can be taken at that moment, and it can be closed as an incident review. Then there's allegations of misconduct, so serious misconduct is alleged, and we level the allegations against employees, and then there's allegations of criminal conduct. It's important to notice the allegations of criminal conduct are not handled within our system. Those are not investigated typically by EPD. They're sent to an outside agency who investigates the criminal conduct. If there's things that might come in afterward, like maybe it's determined criminal conduct didn't occur, or they're not going to be moving forward with that legal process for some reason. We typically, pause any administrative reviews until the criminal is determined what's going to happen with it. But the administrative review can happen after the criminal is sort of resolved. So it doesn't preclude us from leveling allegations of misconduct and doing an administrative review. It's just that it's not handled internally until after the criminal part has been looked at appropriately. So if you look at the kinds of classifications we make in a year, you can see that the most of them are sort of in that supervisor, what we call supervisor review. So service complaints and inquiries, the lion's share of the intakes that we do. There's also allegations of misconduct, policy complaints, as you can see, 13, incident reviews at 13, and allegations of criminal conduct at 2. And so this is just a little insight into like why intakes doesn't equal classifications. So there were 17 intakes that led to 51 allegations of misconduct against 14 employees. So an intake can branch out and generate a lot more work than that singular intake point might sort of indicate. So it's sometimes looking at the classifications numbers is a slightly better way to gauge overall workload when it comes to what our office ends up dealing with. And that has been pretty consistent year over year for the last 5 years. Interestingly, even though intakes go up and down, numbers of classifications has remained relatively steady. So in terms of dispositions, so after the investigation is complete and adjudication recommendations have been received, then those go to the chief. The chief has the final adjudicating authority. So we make recommended adjudications. He also receives recommendations of adjudications from the chain of command of the person against whom the allegations have been made. He makes the final choice, and this was how they ended up. So most of them are sustained. There was one employee who had resigned during investigation. There were 5 that were found to be within policy. So that's that the alleged behavior happened, but it was allowable. There was someone who resigned prior to adjudication. So that means even like the investigation was complete, but the adjudication was not. There were a couple that were unfounded. There were some that were insufficient evidence. So that was that we could neither prove nor disprove the allegation. Those are sort of, in my opinion, the ones that I like the least. I think those are the least satisfying. I would prefer to not have insufficient evidence that happens. And then at the end of the quarter, there was still a very small number that were still open, which I think have resolved by now. So the disciplinary phase, this has come up a little bit in some public meetings recently, questions about discipline and transparency and discipline. As the charter and the ordinance stand now, our office does not make disciplinary recommendations. We are not involved in discipline in any way. We don't, so the adjudications, we make a recommendation. We do not do any such thing, and we're not involved in the disciplinary phase at all. Chief has the final disciplinary authority. We're allowed to report on trends, which is what we do every year when we show you this slide. So we can tell you the kinds of discipline that were received by how many people, for how many allegations. So you can see that there was one employee with a lot of allegations, who resigned prior to termination. So that was the presumptive discipline. There was documented counseling given to 8 employees who had 12 sustained allegations of misconduct. One employee who had 8 allegations resigned during the investigation, which isn't discipline, but sort of is helpful for you to understand where some of those numbers of allegations go. And one employee with 2 sustained allegations received a reprimand. We also do use of force reviews, so including up to and including uses of deadly force. So we review every use of force, and if we have concern about something that happened, we can flag it and open it up as whatever classification we think is appropriate. Deadly force is a little bit different, so the auditor is notified if there's a critical incident. So for example, an officer involved shooting where deadly force was used. We get a call, we're on call. Rob or I at this point go out. There is the process that was set up for critical incidents predates the interagency deadly force investigation team, which is not something that is new, but our office is even older. So it was set up in a time when it did not exist. But it still, I think, is useful in terms of providing some transparency and sort of eyes on the ground at the moment, and sort of, so while EPD is not investigating their own critical incidents, that IDFIT is, and we are there as sort of just observers on scene. We typically get a walkthrough of the scene and can ask questions. So the interagency deadly force investigation team is assembled. They do the investigation to determine whether there's anything criminal about the use of force. On behalf of the officers, the district attorney reviews it, makes a determination about whether it was allowable or not allowable. Was it criminal or not criminal? Then the internal administrative process follows. So that's the part where the department assembles a team of people to look at administratively, were things done properly? Were there lessons learned? Were there things that should change? The auditor has a seat on that committee, but we are a non-voting member. But we may ask questions, we may observe, we can make comments, but that is, but we don't have a vote in the outcomes of that. So 2024 trends, and then we're almost done. About almost 10% of complaints were related to lack of patrol response or untimely patrol response. I thought this was interesting. This is something that about 2 years ago, anecdotally, both IA and our office started noticing that there seemed to be a burgeoning amount of complaints related to this issue. So I made a new tag in the database so we could more clearly see these are service level complaints, but it was like, yes, they're service level complaints, but they're about these really specific things. So we made a new tag so it's easy for us to pull out and look at just those things. So that's like, I think a little over 30 of the intakes were related to lack of patrol response or untimely patrol response. I took a look at the summaries describing each of them because I was kind of curious to see within that body sort of what the trends were. And what I noticed was that mainly they were about things where people felt like they were not safe in their homes, in and around their homes. So whether it was about activity that was going on around their apartment complex or senior living facility, their house, their condo, whatever it was, just that people weren't feeling safe. I think the first question that we ask in these types of cases is, was it dispatched correctly? In all but one case, we determined it was dispatched correctly. So it was properly triaged. It wasn't that it was improperly triaged, but that given where it was triaged, like that there wasn't something, for example, like active going on, and there were more urgent, more potentially life-threatening or serious things going on that were in the queue ahead of it. It was appropriate that their call was lower down in the priority list, but it still left people feeling vulnerable in their homes. The second big category was people feeling unsafe at work, and not business owners calling about untimely patrol response, but workers in businesses calling and saying, I don't feel safe because of behaviors that are going on. And sort of, it's not actively escalated now, but that I think that it's going to be. And the sort of fear and dissatisfaction of a lack of patrol response in those situations, leaving people feeling vulnerable. Those are really the two main categories. And I thought that was sort of an interesting thing that we could learn now that we're more carefully tagging it. You can keep going forward. The other thing that we followed up on, so 2 years ago, we did a report about vehicle pursuits. You can notice in 2023, there was a very large, well, really 2022 and 2023, there was sort of a large jump. We were wondering why. We did a special breakout analysis of this. Last year, there was this question about there was a minor policy change that was made. Are the increases in pursuits attributable to this policy change, or there's some other explanatory factors? We kind of ran it through a few different things, and really the conclusion that I came to was that the policy was largely sound, even with the modifications, but that there seemed to be a discrepancy between officers, particularly new officers with less than 5 years of experience, in terms of the way they understood what the new policy change meant and what command staff and trainers would have expected. And so it's like, to me, they sort of harmonized those expectations, and you can see that vehicle pursuits were back down within the range that was more consistent with a 10-year average. Vehicle pursuits are important, and I forget that people haven't heard the same things over and over, but one of the reasons why we're concerned about vehicle pursuits is because they can be very high risk for officers, high risk for the people who are in the vehicles that are being chased, high risk for civilian bystanders. And so it's not that we're saying we should just let people get away. You're gauging the risk and reward versus apprehending people at a later time in a different manner. And if the pursuit itself, if the risk of the pursuit itself is a good and a wise risk to make at that time. There are times when it is probably the choice that we would all want them to make, and there are other times when maybe the risk is to community of harm is higher than it's not worth it, basically. So we also did a lot of outreach in 2024. Beatrice has this like multi-pronged plan for how we do community engagement. So we do events, which is one of the like very visible things, but we also do a lot of other behind the scenes things. So like presentations with different groups of whether it's community leaders or service providers, so that people who have clients who may want to know about our office know about it. That's not like, that's the stuff that's maybe not so visible, but that's really high impact. There's some recurring meetings and groups that we attend. There are weekly Spanish language broadcasts that Beatrice really helps to spearhead, that's citywide. So it's like what's going on in the city, Spanish language broadcasts, which is really valuable. We do trainings and conferences. Beatrice has continued to make accessibility updates to our webpage, which have been really valuable. And she also provides a lot of citywide translation services. So our office gets to be a resource for providing accessibility both here, but then also across other city departments, which I'm really happy about and proud of the work that she does. Move forward. So looking ahead, we're welcoming a new auditor in 2025. That's kind of our big new thing. We want to continue to improve on our core functions. We can always get better and improve on how we do intakes, how we do classifications, how we communicate out to community, and continue to be robustly engaged in our community. And then something that I'm hoping once we're more fully staffed again is some of the projects that I would have liked to have done maybe over the last year that haven't really been possible because we've been short FTE is looking at how existing data can maybe be used to analyze and provide insights into trends. We collect a lot of really great data, and I think it's there, and I think it could be more robustly used to generate insights. So I'm hoping that that's something that we can do in the future. So that's all I have. That's that. That was 2024. I'm happy to answer any questions that you all have.
Floor is open. Have any questions?
I have a couple of questions. Also, I just made a note that, I think, I'm assuming there's the recording from when you presented that. The
Mhm.
council would be really helpful to any new CRB members, I think.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
I just
And I
learned so
think
much more about what I've been doing for the last year, so.
totally, yeah, and I think it's June 18th is the city council meeting, and it's like a little bit more in depth on some
Mhm.
things, but you got
Yeah.
most of it. The beginning part of the report, that's something that we also started doing about 3 years ago, is just every single report starts with like, who are we, what do we do, like. Because there's a lot, and
Yeah.
it's good to go over it every time fresh. I
Yeah,
think.
it's a helpful overview. One question I've been curious about with the city budget opportunities over the last few months. I've just actually had the auditor's office in mind and was curious, is there like ever a risk for you all? The funding point was touched on like very
Yeah.
briefly.
At this juncture, we are not anticipated to
I know the
lose
budget was-
any fund. Our office is not.
Approved, but
Yeah,
yeah, so in
it's-
general, it feels pretty solid, I guess, just.
Yeah, it's stable. And the way that I think it's the charter is written, that the auditor will be given sufficient resource to maintain the operations of the office. So it's like a little bit vague, but it hasn't been something that so far has been of concern.
Yeah,
We're a really small department.
yeah,
Which is also sort of beneficial in terms of like the impact, our
Yeah.
overall impact on the budget is quite small.
Yeah.
Though I do think that we're pretty conscientious about it, trying to think about making sure that we're stewarding resources really wisely, just because the overall environment is one in which like the reality is people are
Yeah.
losing jobs, and we want to be doing everything we can to meet community needs, but in like the most efficient possible way.
yeah, for sure. And then did you say, early when it's being established, there was an aspect that went to voters? Like,
Mhm.
and is that something that would ever happen again? Like,
Yeah, so it could, so if you want, so the ordinance can be amended by vote of city council. So that's like kind of the daily operating procedures, I think of it that way. The charter, which is more like the constitution of the city, has to be, if you want to amend that, it has to go to a vote of the people.
Mhm.
So the charter was amended. So you can see that that was a very strong move. Because to change something about the charter, you know, like, for example, to remove the auditor's office again would require a vote of the people. And so it was a way to give a pretty strong protection regardless of, for example, changes in shifts or changes in mentality or predilection of city councils over time. To just put it in the ordinance, you can always amend or eliminate that like fairly easily with a vote of just city councilors, but the charter has to be voted on by the people. So, yeah,
Rule versus statute.
yeah, so it provides a very like kind of protection.
Yeah.
And I can't remember what the overall vote was, but it was a really strong mandate. It was like overwhelmingly, I want to say like more than 70% like voted in favor of the charter amendments.
Yeah.
So they were, yeah, had a very strong public support.
Cool.
Yeah.
We don't have any.
Who conducts the documented counseling?
Usually it's the supervisor of the employee involved.
Okay,
And it's counseling like, from council.
like loose definition
Yeah,
of counseling.
It's not like medical
Right.
counseling. It is, you have been advised about this thing and I am documenting it. There are, and I'm not gonna get this completely correct, but in general, between like different kinds of reprimands and documented counseling and, you know, different sorts of things as you move up sort of the severity of the type of discipline. There can be progressive discipline, so if you're found to have violated like the same policy over and over again. And the first time you receive maybe an oral reprimand, then the next time, if it happens again within, I want to say it's within a year, it's a pretty short period of time. If it happens within that year, then the discipline would be progressive. So like, for example, like documented counseling would be, it has a longer shelf life in that disciplinary system than something like an oral reprimand.
Sure.
So even though it's very similar in terms of the person is spoken to about the deficiency, there are some kind of formal differences between those disciplines in terms of other impacts, like follow-on impacts that they might have. If that makes any
Yeah.
sense.
Okay, yeah, I had a question about what counseling meant.
Yeah,
So you mentioned that about 10% of the service complaints were untimely response,
mhm,
is that right?
mhm. So 30-something complaints out of 300 and some.
Okay. Have you had a chance? Has EPD had a chance to say anything about that?
So I try not to speak for EPD. I
Yeah,
would say that that would be a great thing to ask for them to
Yeah.
respond to, and I do think that they're working on some ways to better integrate technology so that they can make more efficient patrol. Like delegation of patrol resource decisions. And that would definitely be something we could ask chief or someone from EPD to come and talk about how they're rolling that out. If you would like.
yeah, that's great, thank you.
Mhm.
All right, thank you.
There we go. Yippee. There's the annual report. Do you want to take a break? Do you want to jump into your cases?
I'd say we take like 3-minute break and then we'll jump into cases if that's okay with everybody.
Don't see any emails requesting public comment.
Do we have anybody in the waiting room?
No,
Cool.
I mean, we have some, but they're
No.
employees.
Do we get a presentation?
We do
Me, Rob?
presentation,
It's Rob's
Hey.
turn.
Anna,
that's right. Somehow I paused it. What now? Why is it not keeping over this time?
The slides are advancing.
Sorry, having technical difficulties for people on the other end. Let's try this again.
The first time.
That's it right there.
Yeah.
Okay. So we're off. So our first case, and we're reviewing policy, service, the lower level complaints tonight. So our first case is professionalism. Okay, so summary of facts for the first one. So reporting party contacted the independent police auditor's office regarding Eugene Police Department officers' actions to unhoused individuals. The RP alleged officers slashed tents, improperly disposed of property, and performed sweeps during inclement weather, freezing. So this was classified as a policy complaint and investigated by Sergeant A. And then those are the materials that we provided. That looks like everything else you provided. I'll go back to this slide and let you guys take it away. So I'll show the slide. You guys will go through it. There's 4 of them. A little bit different than normal.
okay. Normally, we have a conversation in 3 rounds. In the first round, we usually look at intake, monitoring, and classification. In the second round, we look at policies, practices, and training. And in the third round, we make adjudication recommendations, but we're not going to be doing that this time. So Lindsay had suggested that we kind of do a batch discussion around all of this. Would you like to start us off, Monique?
Yes, so I guess I would like to know why we chose classifying this as a policy complaint.
As opposed to like a service complaint or allegation of
Yeah.
misconduct.
Mhm.
So the way back machine, you want?
Right. So this was classified underneath Mark's term, but the reason that he landed on policy complaint is because it's an EPD policy to assist with the unhoused, the cleanups and things that are considered out of policy. So that's how we ended up with policy complaint.
Wait, can you say it again? Out of,
So there's policy to assist city services with unhoused individuals that are, I don't know the correct way to describe it, but improperly camping, I guess is the best way to describe it. So that was how
and that's city ordinance?
that's the policy that
camping?
the EPD uses. EPD assists city services with this, so they're an assisting agency, that's the policy. So that's how we landed on policy complaint.
Is there city ordinance against?
That's a good one. Yeah, is there, so that's
Camping?
self-initiated policy by EPD?
Yeah.
Okay,
But there's not a city.
Well, it's city services is the primary, EPD is the assist, so they will.
Sorry, I'm taking your time.
No, you're fine.
I didn't mean to.
the other question I had was, were there any other policies? So for, you mentioned the assist policy, were there any other policies about how people who are unhoused should be treated, or the circumstances surrounding how you should go about dispersing people?
Well, I think in the closing memo, it referenced that there wasn't an inclement weather policy. As for the specific nuances in the policy, that's kind of to steal Lindsay's line earlier. I don't want to speak for EPD, but I remember that there wasn't a mention of weather deterrence wasn't included in the policy, but they would clearly be looking for items of criminal activity, misconduct, things like that. Or something like that. I mean, again, I don't want to talk for them, but they would invest, they would take that when this was reviewed. If they had found something that was out of the ordinary, best way to describe it. So they would take that and move it into another category.
Okay, and so since we're doing them all at once, I'll make my closing comment on this case, which is I think that EPD should definitely look at the policy they already have in place. Perhaps that could be adjusted, but also looking at implementing policies about how people should be treated in specific circumstances. I perhaps am not faulting them for not coming up with it at this point, but the fact that we have it now gives us an opportunity. And that'll be it for this case.
And then Elise wasn't allowed to have access to everything because of the background check, so we have to wait till September, so sorry.
It's okay.
You're allowed to, I
I-
mean, if you have questions.
Yeah, sure. I actually have a couple, in terms of slash tent, well, actually, slash tent is an interesting phraseology. I just like, is there any indication what slash tent meant from the complaint?
I mean, my interpretation, I don't want to speak for the reporting party, but we're y'all, but my interpretation was vandalism, going past safety and doing something nefarious.
That's how I took it. I was wondering if there's different.
Normally, we have somebody from EPD in here that can answer these questions significantly better than us, but I will, than I could, but I will do my
When I
best.
watched the video that was associated with this as part of the film interview, so one thing that was one thing that I was sort of looking for, like, is this behavior that I'm seeing? I did not witness like slashing of tents. I did notice that there was one encampment that officers approached that they did pull some tarps and some other things down to provide some visibility into like a fairly large area, and they did move things, but they didn't, I wouldn't say they just destroyed them or rendered them not useful in the future, but I think though, it seemed reasonable to me based on an officer safety concern. There were people that weren't visible, that the tarps were sort of obscuring in like an underpass area, and so they definitely did remove some things to cause greater visibility, but I did not see them destroying property in an inappropriate way,
Okay,
because that would be
yeah, that was.
concern. The other thing that I recall from reviewing the video was that, they were not. I noticed they didn't take enforcement action on camping violations.
Okay.
So the enforcement action that was taken in these contexts was related to other criminal behavior or activity. So for example, if you had a warrant or some other things going on, the enforcement action was not about camping itself, which I felt like was an important detail given the inclement weather. So that's just what I sort of recall from the preliminary review.
All right, so I have.
Yeah, I mean, I think slash implies like a weapon or a tool,
Yeah,
and
so I was curious.
yeah,
It would
I think
also
that
render a
was,
tent not
Not
usable,
usable.
which I
Yeah.
think is important if
Okay.
you're talking about a freezing condition.
Mhm.
Yeah, I think the reporting party like explicitly called out, what if it made the tent not usable. I was curious, I was trying to follow the intake and, was there a prompting from the Human Rights Commission on this? I don't know if you all remember this or not, and that was my understanding on reading through it, and I was curious on like, was there a stall or a delay? It seemed like it went, that it was filed via the portal. And then Human Rights Commission, there was an email where they were saying, hey, this was brought up, what's the status? And then that went to the police commission and maybe came back to the auditor's office. And I was just curious if that was like a lapse in time and that was typical or what. It just seemed like a unique trajectory.
I can't answer that. I don't remember. I mean, it wasn't untimely, but
Yeah.
the gap, because we're prohibited for 60 days unless it's something serious for 6 months. But it wasn't untimely, but I don't remember
I
that.
was looking at the dates and it seemed prompt, but then I wondered why they got involved. Maybe they were just really concerned or the reporting party tried multiple channels or something.
That
but-
does, in vacation, I
Yeah,
can't speak
makes sense.
specifics, I don't recall in this specific incident, but that certainly does happen where people may go multiple places or get referred to us eventually, or, you know.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Mhm.
And then also, I thought I understood that there was also a report, not only the tent slashing, but kicking and throwing people's belongings down the hill. Which seemed distinct, and I noticed in there's a lot of video footage for this
There
one
is.
too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I noticed in one, and I didn't watch it all, but one of them that did happen. And I was curious, like, yeah, is that appropriate? I didn't catch the follow-up to that specifically, and that seemed a little bit distinct. And not about destroying property, but about general disregard and like behavior and treatment of folks. And so I was just curious. Like that, I assume that just kind of got grouped in, and it's, if I was understanding you correctly, this is because it's under this umbrella policy that exists about EPD playing a role to assist with sweeps or whatever you'd call them, and so that all just fell under that umbrella, and that was it. It'd get parsed out.
yeah, that was his determination.
Okay. I guess my final closing comment is unrelated to the auditor's office or EPD, but I wish that ODOT could provide a concrete timeline for follow-up on cleanup, which feels like a very basic logistical thing to offer to also promote dignity. And there was just the one encounter where they said, you need to leave now. ODOT's coming to their property and, they said, how long do I have? Which is, I know they're breaking the law, but also a reasonable question. They're like, ODOT never, doesn't tell us. I was like, someone needs to say something to ODOT, so I'm saying that here in this meeting. That's my, yeah, closing this.
I also had a question about ODOT, and then I learned this week that they're losing 600 employees.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah. Sorry to like bring that up, but also I think, yeah, this is a super, I'm glad you brought this up because I think it's a super important. Aspect of this that's just only gonna become more complicated now, like there's going to be like way massive. Cut to ODOT and a loss in resources in that case. So I can only see this getting more. Yeah. This is not gonna get better now. But I think that you're spot on that's something that also needs to happen. I don't know, I want to communicate to the public, for anyone that's listening, that this was like hard to watch and hard to see, and yeah, I don't, in terms of class, I had the same question about classification and why it, if there's any policy that would happen. If it was an allegation of misconduct, but ultimately, I think that I see the police auditors stance on this and the reason for classification. As difficult as it was to see, and I don't know, I think that the public needs to know that this is a problem that appears to me, from my like limited perspective, to be way bigger than EPD. And that EPD could probably, I don't know, not in terms of policies or procedures, but in terms of practices, I don't know, maybe attend to, I don't even know what kind of training could be provided here. I don't, Brittany, I wonder if you had any thoughts on this in particular, as given your standing role in the community.
yeah, I mean, from the footage, and there's, you know, multiple incidences. I guess the one under the overpass is the one that's like most pronounced.
Mhm.
It did not appear that the individuals that were contacted were aggressive or hostile in any way, and they seemed quite compliant, and it felt like an overall tone of disrespect. So I would default to trauma-informed care training, which I think exists in little snippets. But just a recognition of not only understanding the context of those people's likely life story, but also how much the kind of like flippant demeanor would impact and potentially escalate the situation when there really didn't seem to be any safety risks.
Yeah.
And some of the things I've been sensitive to in the cases that we've reviewed around behavior, I have since learned, like, well, sometimes the person's really aggressive and the officer is responding for safety for themselves. And like, okay, but in this case, there was really no aggression. And so perhaps that training, and then it just feels like overly basic, but just the reality of stigma. And that also goes beyond EPD. I do, well, actually, one little thought since you let me speak again. Just thinking, I appreciated the references to community court, and shout out to City of Eugene for having that too. And that the officers used it. That was a good step.
Yeah, I don't know, just watching this feels like, with the loss of Cahoots and the reduction in ODOT, and yeah, that as you, I think you said it best, that like the necessity of trauma-informed care is gonna be like paramount here.
Yeah.
So, that's my closing comment. Rob?
We will move on to number 2. So police response. So in case 2, the reporting party contacted the independent police auditor's office regarding Eugene PD's response to requests for assistance. The RP contacted contacted the communication center, requested Cahoots respond to his or her residents to help with the child in distress. RP stated that he or she did not want police response. RP complained Eugene PD officers responded to his or her residents, and the RP questioned the officer's actions. So this was classified as an inquiry and investigated by Sergeant A. And then those are the materials that we provided, and I'll go back for the discussion on all the points.
Would you take us away, Brittany?
Yeah. This video was incredibly difficult. I needed my own personal self-care after reviewing this. And I was particularly really interested to understand the impact. You know, this is obviously while Cahoots was still operating in Eugene, but on reduced hours, to my understanding, due to staffing. I also was keenly listening because Lane County has our mobile crisis team that has been stood up and was operating at this time, but not at this hour because of staffing. There's a whole other conversation about behavioral health workforce right now. It's real. And it was incredibly sobering and painful to watch the reality of that significant gap in our community. It was helpful to view and read all of them or the bulk of the materials and understanding why dispatch operated in the way that they did. Because initially I was very concerned and perplexed on why the caller stated, "Never mind, don't send anyone," was asked if they were safe. They said yes. Asked if their child was safe. They said yes. And then I understood that it was because of the background noise that I assume relates again to some dispatch policy on when you send EPD, and then also the comments that, which I guess there's maybe no way to fully know, but that perhaps EPD would have been sent regardless, even if Cahoots was operating because of those added details. I think one of the things that was the most troubling, if I had to pick, was the officer's repeated comment to the parent about how the parent could have gone to jail for allegedly striking the officer. And the body worn video appeared, and there was lots of commentary on this about the parent getting in between the officer and the child. And as a mother myself, that was very troubling to watch, and felt incredibly unnecessary and unhelpful that the officer, I think 3 or 4 times, said you could and should maybe or whatever be going to jail for striking an officer. And for me, with all of the grace and respect to EPD for doing a really hard job, I was like, where's the freaking humanity right now? And it's not like the officer was injured. It didn't appear. So that was upsetting. And it made me wonder if that officer was activated themselves by this incredibly difficult situation. And if so, there was a million cops there, which was also perplexing to me. And that officer could have tapped out, but the way that they were speaking, didn't seem super escalated, but clearly impacted, and maybe shouldn't have continued to be the point of contact for the parent. So none of that is about classification or anything, just my kind of feelings about it. I do think the incident aside, it seemed like the 2 parents involved had some confusion around the portal versus a phone submission. And the portal's like pretty new still, right? Is that right? So I just thought, I think it's Amanda who received did a great job of explaining, but they were clearly so committed to having this entered appropriately and fairly, maybe not fully trusting the system that it would be. So it was cool to hear how they were reassured, but also I thought, well, there might be an opportunity to further clarify what's the distinction between a portal submission and a phone submission? And why would you do, like, do you need to do both? And why or why not? That sort of thing, because they seemed really intentional about trying to understand that, and they were still confused. And to be fair, they were probably still incredibly traumatized from the situation, and that maybe was blurring things. And then I also think general community education around the dispatch piece, and like clearly this parent was unclear about what happens when you call and request Cahoots, and that will continue even if Cahoots is currently not operating in Eugene. That's a thing for Lane County Mobile Crisis to pay attention to and needs to learn, and they have their own dispatch procedures through 911, but also through the sheriff's office. And I don't, even I've gone and toured and sat in on spaces. I know I missed our last little visit, but I have a decent understanding, I think, about that, and I still wasn't clear on why EPD went until I watched the whole thing. So that seems like a community education opportunity. And this is just an incredibly painful example of a significant gap in our community.
Thank you. I think that, yeah, after I watched that video, I was, also in need of some self-care because it's incredibly distressing. And yeah, I think that anybody that watched the video would have, I guess I can't generalize, but I would assume would have a similar reaction, let alone the officers responding to the situation. We had a training last month at dispatch, and that really it doesn't make me feel one way or another about this, but it complicates how I understand this now because you know, we learned about the way that like not just EPD, but the what's the center called?
Comms.
Central Comms.
Yeah.
How they have a triage system for dispatch. And I don't know how they classified this, but I imagine given what the dispatcher heard and the kind of pressures and stresses that the dispatcher is under, very kind of complicated situation here. I just want to ask a clarifying question, just to be sure. So, showing up, is that on the continuum of a show of force?
And it is, by the way, the policy is no.
Okay,
While on its face, like as a community member, as a civilian, I understand an officer in uniform impacts me.
Yeah.
Different than someone in plain clothing would. It is not I should say, it is not a reportable show of force by our
Right.
standards, if that is helpful in
Yeah.
clarifying.
yeah. A few summers ago, we heard an allegation where there was a similar, it wasn't this, it was a similar case where an adult, a parent had made a call involving an adult child at the home. And EPD responded differently, but similarly, in that there was like, would seem to me to be a large and perhaps unnecessarily unnecessarily amount of police officers. And I'm just remembering back to this discussion about I mean, they went into that house with weapons drawn, and there, if I remember correctly, I don't remember weapons being drawn here, in this case. So that's a step in the right direction. But I think I was equally disturbed by the communication with the parent. And as a parent with like a 5-year-old and having just gone through the still learning to teach a child emotional regulation, I'm like trying to quarterback coach, you know, and be like, we gotta let this play out. And at the same time, not knowing much about this child's trauma response. But it doesn't seem like there was any policies that were violated. And at the same time, it seems like this was handled poorly. So there's this like huge area right now that I'm like struggling to find language to describe, to say that this wasn't good enough, so.
I relate to that, the difficulty of making decisions based on a rubric that's very formal, and then the actual subjective experience and even subjective witnessing of an event. Like reconciling those two things are difficult. And I agree with what you both said earlier about this case in general, just being difficult, adjudication aside, just the facts are hard, as many of the important cases we review are. I think the only comment I have is with respect to training. You mentioned trauma-informed care for the last case. I think that could be useful in this case. Also, just de-escalation in general. I think it might be a little different because of the reporting party and their child, but I still think the de-escalation tactics might apply. That's all I have for this one.
Another point of commonality between the case that you're referencing and this one that make them extra complicated are the Abuse Protection Act law.
mm,
So in both cases, if the officers had observed, for example, the child striking the parent, that would have been a mandatory arrest. And avoiding the mandatory arrest was an important feature, I think, of this case that makes it particularly complex. In the case that you were referring to, a mandatory arrest APA violation had already occurred.
mm,
And that nexus of those things makes these cases additionally complex when it comes to police response. I'll just throw that out there for the good of the order.
And one more thing, so I need to control my facial reactions, but when we were talking about the continuum or the levels of force,
Yeah.
definitely understand that policy, it's very different. It's not a reportable use of force, but there's some, the way I've learned it in sociology is there's theory that use of force starts with an officer's presence, it goes up for an officer's voice, asking things of you, and then it moves into telling you to do things and then using your hands. So there are multiple ideas of what force is, and we in this process are using a very specific and defined.
As it comes to reportable
Right.
uses of force, or reportable shows of force, yeah, that are defined differently than the impact that may be had based
Yes.
on the different behaviors and actions. Yeah, you're right.
Do you know if what law did you reference? That abuse,
The Abuse
Okay.
Protection Act.
was that communicated to the parents at any point?
I can't recall off the top of my head about that.
Yeah, that seems like it would
I
have been
think
helpful.
that it's an
after the
important,
fact.
yeah, I think it's an important detail.
And it applies to minors too, then, correct?
Yes, they don't go to grown-up jail.
Yeah.
But they go to,
Yeah.
into the juvenile system. It applies to minors.
that's hard to think about because I wanna. I wanna ask like, okay, are we gonna do that with 6-year-olds, 10-year-old, but that's unnecessary kind of, speculating here. There was something that I wanted to point out and just put on the table without any expectations of response but something that I caught that okay, so the IA report. 2, 3. In the summary section, on page 3. It reads, should I just say RP, reporting party?
Reporting parties did it. They contacted Coots on Friday. Yep.
Yeah, on Friday at this time. For their 15-year-old Black child who was in mental health crisis. And I just wanted to note that we don't often see descriptions of, uh, white community members in that way, and just wanted to bring that to, again, put that on the table. And I don't necessarily know what to do with that or how that information was relevant here. Or in what way it seemed to be relevant to the person who wrote this, but I don't necessarily know what to do with it, or if there is some.
I'm happy you brought it up. I actually think that it's helpful. It is absolutely true that we're not seeing in there whenever it's a white reporting party, but I think the context makes it a meaningful note. I don't know if the reporting party identified that themselves, but if they did, then that's certainly important.
They did.
I was
Okay,
gonna
yeah.
say
Oh.
in their phone call, they did call that out.
Okay, yeah.
However, it is an interesting point to consider. We're the ones who write the summaries. So someone in this office will write the
Okay.
summaries, and it is important to think about what are the details that are salient? And are we presenting things in an even fashion? Are we including relevant details? Are we excluding relevant details? Like, it's important to be really careful in how we do that. So I'm glad that you bring it up.
Yeah.
It's worth thinking about how we summarize.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's also, yeah, I had forgotten about that on the call and, this makes sense.
I think it was great. I chose this case for it because I was being aware of certain things.
Thank you.
We will move on to case 3. Courtesy. So the summary of facts. So the RP complained to Eugene PD Lieutenant A. The Eugene PD Officer B had been unprofessional and discourteous with 2 officers. So from the reporting party's police agency, which is other law enforcement agency, not EPD, while at the Lane County Jail. RP also complained Officer B made an insulting comment to one of the officers. So this was classified as a service complaint courtesy, and it was investigated by Sergeant C. And then here are your materials, and I will go back so y'all can take it away.
Can you remind me who initiated the complaint?
The complaint was initiated by, a lieutenant, well, I mean, someone from another agency talked to a lieutenant makes blue team entry, so EPD made got it going.
Okay.
These things are complicated, and the next one's even more complicated, but
I mean, I will
Yeah.
say that's not a totally uncommon way that a complaint will make it to us, whether it's a community member who complains to a sergeant or an officer on scene who calls the sergeant because the person is complaining and they make a blue team entry that comes to us. Whether outside law enforcement agency, any other kind of agency calls somebody at EPD to make a complaint and they document it and then forward it to us. It's not
Yeah, it's-
uncommon.
it's their practice. If you talk to an EPD officer and make a complaint, they will fill out a blue team entry and it will come to us. That happens all the time.
Okay, so I can't imagine, or I guess I don't want to assume that this kind of, interagency strife is common, is it?
This is an unusual complaint. I don't recall very many other law enforcement agencies complaining about courtesy against EPD officers. And my
I've
memory is not eternal. but
never seen, I've been here 3.5 years, I've never seen a complaint like this.
it's
But
unusual.
this field is driven with type A competitive personalities, and one type A probably didn't like another type A, and here we are discussing it.
It seems kind of silly compared to the last one, but I'm not trying to diminish it also at the same time, you know?
When you put it in that contract, that's a fact.
Um. I think that's all, that's my closing comment.
I think I also was just noticing the pieces that you were. I was essentially seeing this as an internally generated complaint But it didn't happen here and it didn't happen to a member of the public, our public. It's I don't know if this is appropriate to say, but in talking about how rare this is, it felt awkward, like you guys are supposed to be on the same team. Why are you having a problem? But I think the intake, classification, investigation and monitoring were good. I think the courtesy policy is sufficient. And I don't know that this behavior was large enough to perhaps warrant a recommendation for department-wide training of any kind. That's all I have in that.
Is it my turn, Felicia?
Do you have any questions?
I guess my only thing, is there any way that that the lieutenant ever isn't gonna generate a blue team report on something like this? Or is, as soon as whoever is at the, another agency partner, as soon as that person says, hey, this happened, it's gonna generate a report and it's gonna end up here, even though it seems like
It's one of
the general tenor it was pretty insubstantial.
gonna
a good
generate
question.
a complaint every
Yeah.
time. It's one of the most. I was shocked when I first started working here and Leah was kind of training me. And I couldn't get over everything that came in became a complaint, because in my previous life, I had a lot of discretion and I could say. In something similar to this, be like, work it out.
Yeah.
But that's not this system, and it still amazes me that this is the system, but yes, they will make an entry every time.
Understood.
And the
Okay.
reason they have to is because we have classification authority.
Right.
So we could take this complaint and say, this is a serious allegation of conduct. So you can violate the courtesy policy in like a minor way, in a
Sure.
way that maybe would most appropriately be handled by supervisor. You can violate the courtesy policy in a major way, and it could be a serious allegation of misconduct. If they don't put it in the pipeline and let us classify it, then they're doing what we're charged with doing, which they can't do. They don't get to decide if it's minor or major. We get to decide if it's minor or major, which is why you see it on minor league night. When we're
Sure.
doing like the things that don't make it to major allegations of misconduct, but. Part of like what we're open to is like, did we miss? Were we wrong? Like, should it have, gone a different path? But yes, it's routine that these things come in.
We have seen major allegations of major policy or
Misconduct.
no,
Discourtesy.
just, yes, courtesy
Become
violations.
allegations.
Yes.
You have seen that. Yep.
Thank you.
I wrote on my notes, no comment, but, the only thing I will say is this is one where I wished I had emailed and asked you all to recommend where to watch in the footage, because I was like, where's the thing?
Sorry.
Yeah.
It's not, that's not something I was just like,
Too bad
oh, this is.
Bernadette's not here, she would ask the question, I would have sent it to y'all.
And I will say, because there was also footage from, or I didn't understand, earlier in the day, maybe with the officer that was.
It's not the first list up.
Yeah, so I was watching, and then halfway through, I'm like, I don't think the piece is in here. But what I did gain from that is the officer the complaint was about actually seemed very pleasant and kind and engaged with an unhoused individual, or appearingly unhoused individual, in a very kind, respectful way. I was like, huh. So that just kind of flavored when I eventually got to the incident. It made it seem even sillier. That's all.
So our case 4 is respectfulness. So the summary of facts, so this, bear with me here. So the reporting party, who's the second party, complained to Eugene PD Sergeant A that a fourth party was upset an officer used improper language when conversing with a third party. So the fourth party overheard a conversation between the officer and the third party. The fourth party believed the officer's use of an incorrect name and pronouns were offensive and inappropriate. So this was classified as a service complaint courtesy and investigated by Sergeant A.
I don't.
The one that you reviewed with the top, technically, on that path.
I'm done. You guys can pick away and do your thing.
It's back to you.
I don't remember much about this. Well, do you have any reflections about this case?
The way that it came in was complex, because it was like multiple steps removed from the person, the people involved in the conversation. So I thought that was. I remember that part. Do you have?
I mean, we don't get as many of these, but we definitely get them where there's somebody who's kind of outside of it, who overhears something, interprets something and is upset by it. And then this is where the system works because they close the gap, so it goes through and it has different, I mean, it's not as, I don't want to diminish it, but it's not, like the second one was difficult to watch, right? It's heart wrenching, parent. So this one is different than that, and this gives an opportunity for the sergeant to do an investigation and go back and close the loop.
Okay, so then my next question is, you classified this as a service complaint / courtesy, so did we feel like that, well, did these things happen?
So couple things. So the classification was done by Mark, not me. So I didn't have any input in that. I mean, the comments happen, but the context is what is up for debate here, and it's not my job as working in this office to comment on my opinions on the context, but the fourth party was upset with the context that they interpreted this at.
Mhm.
And my reading of this is that the officer and the third party's context was different, but
So the other thing that I would say is when we classify something as a service complaint, now this is getting like way down into the weeds. We have sub-classifications that we classify as, again, to sort of notice if there's trends. So that you know those sub-classifications, we're saying it's a service complaint. It can be related to conduct. It can be related to courtesy. It can be related to performance. It can be related to disputed facts. So we try to do a classification and then a sub-classification. So when you see that, when it says service complaint / courtesy, that's the sub-classification that was chosen by the person who made the classification. Of the sub-classifications available, say that one is the one that most closely aligns with what they believe they saw. So, yeah, just it makes it easier to pull reports and look at the types of service complaints and the types of sub-classifications, if that's something that we want to do with that system. And it's something that's been done as long as I know that we've had this system, but the sub-classification isn't something you always, in fact, you would never see it because it only exists for things that are allegations of misconduct. Or, I mean, I should say, allegations of misconduct also have sub-classifications, but you would, because you have the policy allegation, you're gonna understand exactly what it's related to in a different kind of way than a service complaint, which isn't necessarily gonna have a policy attached to it in the same kind of way. So,
Thank you. So when we talk about fourth parties, is the,
and that's my right,
Yeah.
I'm trying to make this as clear as possible, like what 2 CRBs ago when Clay was asking me, I was like, that's Officer Q, not Officer C. I'm trying to make it as clear as.
but the fourth party
So,
is,
second party's the reporting, fourth party's the person who overheard conversations between officer and third party, because I consider the reporting party to
Yeah.
be the second person in this. But
and
that's
so
my doing, not.
do we
Daisy's
consider
or any-
this internally generated?
no.
Okay. And then I think, so going back to something you had said earlier, it is possible, and it could be a violation of policy or be misconduct if an officer used the inappropriate pronouns for name, just wasn't in this case.
It was not classified in that way,
Right.
but courtesy on its face could go into a different pipeline depending on sort of, on how the auditor determines if it's serious or misconduct or minor misconduct. It could go either way.
Okay, that's really helpful.
Yeah.
So then my recommendation is going to be that either or all of the above, they consider, I mean, I feel like the courtesy thing is very broad, so, but they could consider adding. They can just consider this issue, cases like this issue with the courtesy policy, or they can be more specific and make a more specific policy to this issue, and I think that would be helpful. It's good to hear. I think you said you don't hear too many of these cases. So that's good to hear. I think this is something that should be reviewed. Yeah, that's all I have on that.
No comment.
My only comment is that, and now that I've learned, every complaint gets the review, that also a little more context, but I just appreciated the thorough review. I felt like the supervisor follow-up and write-up was brief, but seemed like it was taken seriously. And by the nature of the concern, I'm glad to hear that this matter is taken seriously by our local police department and by the entity that reported it to. Sure.
Right?
What was it? This is who we have oversight over, and this person we don't.
Correct.
Okay.
It's confusing.
Fourth party.
So there are, you know, so he works with any number
Yeah.
of staff at any number of agencies.
I wish
We
Clay,
only have oversight over the EPD employees. We do not over
Mhm.
other entities' employees.
And remind me, is it sworn and unsworn or just sworn?
We do it all,
Okay, okay,
EPD employees, even
Okay.
volunteers.
okay.
Yep.
But
You
okay.
all only
Okay.
review sworn, serious allegations of misconduct against sworn personnel.
Okay, thank you.
That was actually the question that I had, is that,
Yep, that is the involved.
but under the independent police
That is a
auditors.
sworn person.
Yeah.
So that person.
Okay.
would be
Oh, I didn't
someone-
know that.
Yes,
Okay.
They were sworn.
yes.
I asked that question too, I wasn't sure.
Is that the case everywhere?
I don't know. That's a good question.
But the way that Rob explained it, they are taking someone's freedom away.
I don't know if that, yeah,
They
I mean, I
could.
don't want to say too much, cause I
Sure,
don't want
sure.
to say anything that's identifiable,
Yeah.
cause it would be pretty
Sorry.
easy to identify this person. I'm happy to talk
Yeah.
offline, but I don't, yeah, I don't think it's appropriate to comment, for me to comment.
Sure, yeah, I'm happy and I wanna say a little surprised that this was taken so seriously, and I don't wanna be cynical about that, but, yeah, the fact that this was, you know, the fact that we're talking about this is a good sign. And I think that that's my, yeah, that's my final comment.
Clay was here, so you could ask me about the third person, fourth person.
All right, so we finished up our service level complaints and we have time right now for the auditor's report.
I already did that part, I'm afraid.
Yeah,
Wow.
I did that out of order. No, I
Um,
mean, I can give you an auditor's report. I'll give you a short report about what's going on in the
Sure.
office. So, the short report is, you should get one more newsletter from me. Craig starts August 20th, and your next meeting will be in September, so you all will have the chance to meet and discuss. That's sort of like the timeline that we're on for the time being. I just want to say that in appreciation of the RV, as you all, noticed and called out, like in this meeting, you're taking on a lot of emotional labor and other kinds of labor in watching these things. And I just want to acknowledge, like, I really appreciate that you all do that to provide the transparency for this office that can provide transparency for what's going on in police. It takes a toll, it's costly. And I really appreciate that you undertake that work on behalf of community and hold that for us all. So it is not unnoticed, it is not underappreciated. I really appreciate that you do that and then thoughtfully come in and discuss it. And it is hard, and all of us have different ways that we relate to this material, and different things will hit you differently, at different times, based on your experiences, based on where you are, based on whether you're a parent, based on lots of things, right? And I just want to say thank you all for that undertaking. It's not just bureaucratic. It's also, personal and costly. So thank you all. We have our new CRB member, at least she'll be ready to be up and running fully in September. I would also just, encourage you, if you have questions, if you have concerns, please do feel free to reach out. We have a small list of trainings that we're sort of have queued up, but if there's things that you want to learn, things that you think would be beneficial, not only for you to hear, but for the public to hear, please let us know. We want to do everything we can to accommodate and help you feel equipped to review things. There's certain things that are sort of perennial topics that I think are worth looking at again and again and again. The board turns over, new things change, policies change, practices change. So just let us know. And what am I forgetting, Rob? We'll do that. Yeah, we'll work towards public comment. So I have not received in the email any virtual requests for public comment. We don't have any here, so I
There was
don't.
one dropped off.
Is it anything?
There was one.
Okay,
So we can skip that.
so we can skip that. I would say that if there was some kind of technical difficulty or some kind of problem, the board can also receive comment via email. So you can feel free to email the auditor's office and we can provide those comments to the board, or we can read them aloud in a meeting. So that's something that we can offer if there was some kind of glitch.
Thank you.
If there is any training that you guys would like, please let us know, because that'll be possible. Now it's fine.
The one I noted today was on EPD response times, or how they're managing technology and how they're doing that. So that was
Absolutely.
Okay, yeah, we can do that.
Are there any more field trips planned for next year?
We can do field trips whenever you
What
want.
would you like?
I don't know. I'd
We asked you
to go
so many
somewhere
mental.
in person. since I
EPD
miss it.
headquarters. Have you been there? EPD headquarters?
I have been to a conference room for a meeting.
That's where you'll be, is that conference room.
I'd get a more robust tour if you were interested.
Yes, that would be nice.
I think the jail tour is really fascinating. I don't know if CRB does that, but
They have in the long distant past, but
Oh.
it has not recently been done. So
Probably
that's a
some new
good one. Yeah.
things happen
Yeah,
over
and it might be good to understand how the actual handoff from EPD to the jail
Totally.
happens.
Yeah.
By, seeing, the lock and everything else, so.
Absolutely.
And I'll say I did a ride along with EPD a year ago and went in and witnessed the booking process, and it was fascinating and gave me a lot of context for this case.
Nobody got arrested on my shift.
Oh.
I did not get to go to the booking.
So we have time for closing comments. You started last round,
I think so.
Brittany? I'm sorry, Elise?
One way insistent.
I'm
Yeah,
so sorry.
sure. I guess, a good first meeting. I was glad to get to participate a little bit. I think I'm excited to learn from you all and hear kind of what has come up before, what is maybe new or different. So thank you all for welcoming me, and that's all I have.
I just wanted to appreciate your comments, Lindsay, about the weight that we carry, and recognizing that you all do that too. You get paid to do it, but you're still choosing this career and it clearly seems to align with your values, and I appreciate knowing that work is being done for our community. in gratitude to my fellow board members for consistently maintaining a safe space to be open and honest about what we're witnessing and what we're holding on behalf of our people.
Yeah, training topic, does EPD have a trauma-informed training for officers?
We can learn more.
I would love to sit through that and learn about that. Yeah, second, the importance of witnessing is like a civic act and kind of a civic duty. And that I think that, you know, even though I often feel like there's things that are way too big for me, that's something that I feel like committed to and that is important in some way. I also want to publicly congratulate Monique for graduating and moving on to law school in the fall. So yeah, congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah, I can share. This is my last meeting. I cannot express how grateful I am to have been on the CRB. It's a lot I want to say, but it's okay if I don't remember it all. I mean, I started on this board when I was 20. I'm 23 now. It's crazy. I feel like maybe I've not grown up on this board, but a very pivotal moment in my life was spent here with all of you. So I'm grateful that you have the patience and the grace to teach me. I feel like I've learned so much about law enforcement, about city government. Just about a lot of things. I definitely am gonna miss seeing everyone. Gonna suck not seeing Beatrice and Robin Lindsay. But like, so like, I'm just very grateful. And I'm so
Thank you for serving. It's been a pleasure.
Right. 7:27, we adjourn. Thank you.
thank you.
Yeah.